Hello and welcome into another episode of Preps to Pros. I'm Cooper Petagna alongside Andrew Ivins, and college football is officially back in week one. What a night last night. Florida State, LSU, back and forth, a wild game. We're going to get into that. We also got a little bit of recruiting juice. Our own Andrew Ivins got to see Jackson State, Deion Sanders, Travis Hunter, the number one player in the class of 2022, live this weekend against Florida A&M. We're also going to talk about college football expansion and how that's going to impact the game as well, and what teams on the outside looking in now have a chance to compete for a national title. But so much going on. And Drew, you look down, episode 15 for the Oyster Boys. Congratulations, my man.
Yeah, milestone, right? Last night was awesome. And really the past few nights of football have been awesome. You go back to Thursday night, Friday night with Indiana, Illinois. It's here, and I love it.
It's crazy. The whole weekend, Labor Day weekend, I'm back in Louisiana, wedding festivities, all that type of stuff. Hashtag fall wedding. Josh Pate would kill me if he knew that I was attending a fall wedding, especially on week one of the season. But Drew, a lot happening, and we're going to get to that. We're going to talk a lot about what happened and transpired all weekend in college football. But first, we got to get to a little bit of recruiting. We are a recruiting show, and I want to start with the top receiver in the class of 2024, a guy from the state of Florida. That is Jeremiah Smith, and a guy that just recently took an unofficial visit to Columbus for that Ohio State-Notre Dame game. What are you hearing with Jeremiah Smith and the Buckeyes?
Really, Ohio State had probably the best collection of 2024 talent on campus this weekend than anyone else in the country, and Jeremiah Smith is one of the headliners. This is a kid I've had crystal ball to the Buckeyes for a few months now, and just talking with some different people familiar with that recruitment. I love Ohio State here. I'm getting ready to bump my confidence score up from a 5 possibly to an 8. Who knows when he'll make a decision, but it sounds like Ohio State is in the driver's seat for Smith, who's the cousin of Geno Smith, the Seattle Seahawks starting quarterback this upcoming season. And I just think he likes Zone 6. I think he likes Brian Hartline. I think he probably saw on Saturday night that the Buckeyes might need a little help at wide receiver after those first few guys. So I like Ohio State for Jeremiah Smith right now, at this stage in the process.
We saw Jackson Smith Najigba already banged up in that game. It looks like he's going to be week to week with the hamstring injury. But Drew, another guy in the state of Florida, one of the best athletes in the country in 2024, JoJo Trader, Ohio State in the mix there. But it looks like Miami is starting to chip away on him as well.
Yeah, JoJo Trader, he actually flew up to Columbus with Jeremiah Smith and visited Ohio State, I think, for the second or third time. And the Buckeyes, they want JoJo. They're in on him. But I think Miami might have some momentum here in this recruitment. I would keep an eye on Miami. One contact I'm familiar with at Ohio State brought up the Hurricanes and said that he thought the Hurricanes might be pretty hard to beat. Obviously, Miami played Bethune-Cookman this weekend. Wasn't a huge draw of local recruits, but JoJo Trader is a guy who's been on campus in Coral Gables. He's a guy that I anticipate to return to a game at some point down the season. And Mario Cristobal, they want to put up a fence in the backyard, and JoJo Trader would be an excellent guy to keep home, as he's a guy that can do it on both sides of the ball. I mean, most people think receiver, but he's been playing some DB this fall, and he's pretty good on the defensive side of the ball.
Jeremiah Smith, JoJo Trader. We talked a lot last week about Brandon Ennis and Mark Fletcher, two of the best playmakers in the Sunshine State. Joe, it kind of seems like there's a little bit of a recruiting rivalry going on between Ohio State and Miami, so we'll keep an eye on those two. But Drew, just like we promised, a wacky week one, a lot going on. I kind of like this segment. We're talking with producer Jesse. We're going to talk a little bit about his guy and Cam Rising and Utah Utes in Florida. But this was a game that we really had circled coming into this week, the debut of Billy Napier in Gainesville. And to me, this game had everything you wanted. Two very physical teams. Utah, a lot riding on this game with the SEC opponent and playing in a hostile environment. But I love the way that Florida played. I think there were a lot of questions coming into the season. What were we going to get with Florida and Billy Napier? And I think you saw it. And to me, there was a team that showed a lot of belief, a lot of confidence in the process and what Billy Napier had preached. Anthony Richardson, to me, was a guy that I really look forward to coming into this game, kind of seeing what he was able to do through the air and then on the ground as well. Kind of gives them a dimensional threat at the quarterback position. But I think the Gators can surprise some people this year, Andrew.
I agree, and I got this upcoming weekend's game against Kentucky circled as one to keep an eye on. To me, I'm getting ready to write the winners and losers when it comes to recruiting for this past weekend, and Florida's the biggest winner for me. I mean, it was a packed recruiting section inside the swamp, and everyone's going to talk about Cormani McClain. I know Steve Wiltfong, the director of recruiting at 24/7 Sports, he tossed in a crystal ball forecast for the Gators in favor of Cormani. What I think is notable is there was two blue chip running backs in the stands, Cedric Baxter Jr., who is committed to Texas, and then you had Richard Young, who was committed to Alabama. Both those guys were inside the swamp, and I think they saw a physical smash mouth brand of football that Billy Napier wants to play. And what I thought was really, really notable is the fact that the Gators rotated three different running backs, including Trevor Etienne, who's Travis Etienne's brother, as a true freshman. So I loved everything about Florida's performance. It's a game that could have gone either way, but this is a signature win for Billy Napier in his first career game for the Gators. I just wonder, are expectations going to be a little too high moving forward?
Absolutely. I mean, why not? That is college football. But, Florida was a team coming into this that certainly we felt had the most to gain. We highlighted that last week. If they were to come into this game against a top 10 team in Utah, a team that returned a lot of its starters from last year, a team that played Ohio State very well in the Rose Bowl, if they were able to win this game, it was going to benefit them very well this cycle, not only in 2023, but in 2024 as well. So the Gators certainly a lot to benefit there as well. But Drew, let's stick in the SEC East and let's talk about the defending national champions and the Georgia Bulldogs. This is very Alabama-esque. First game of the season against a non-conference opponent. They beat the brakes off of Oregon and former Georgia defensive coordinator Dan Lanning 49-3 at that quote-unquote neutral site game in Atlanta. But it was all Bulldogs. And Drew, I know there was a guy you texted me in the middle of that game that kind of caught your eye. That was top 247, one of the best athletes in the country last year, Malachi Starks.
Malachi Starks, the 24/7 Sports Freshman of the Week. Chris Hummer just named him that. He was my number one freak in the class of 2022. No, he was awesome, but I think the story of that game is Georgia's defense in general. I mean, there was no regression from the Bulldogs. They didn't have any sacks. I think that was kind of a product of Bo Nix getting out of trouble. But that linebacker core, that front seven, they didn't give up a run longer than 16 yards. And I know Oregon eventually padded the stats, but to me, that defense is still an elite unit. You mentioned Malachi Starks, Mykal Williams. How about him starting as a true freshman for the defending national champions? I just watched that game and I was like, oh my gosh, these guys are just getting better. I go back to what Shane Beamer said last season, the South Carolina coach, about all the dang 5-stars the Bulldogs have on that defensive front. And I said it's going to get better. And I think it's going to get better based on what they have committed in the class of 2023. On Friday night, I was up in West Palm Beach. I saw Raylan Wilson, a potential 5-star for us in the class of 2023. He was playing and he looked awesome. He's part of Georgia's 2023 recruiting class. So no regression from the Bulldogs. Loved Malachi Starks. And I think those freshmen are just getting started. I expect big things from them once SEC play gets underway.
What an embarrassment of riches for head coach Kirby Smart in Athens at Georgia. Mykal Williams, Malachi Starks, a couple names. If you haven't heard of them already, those are going to be guys that are going to be making a lot of noise. But Drew, let's get to the, I would say, Oyster Boys game of the week. I think we got to stick with that going forward. But one game that for us, we had talked about all offseason that was going to be really critical, that we were going to know a lot about Florida State and LSU. That game arrived late last night in New Orleans and probably one of the more crazier games that I have seen to date. It seemed like Florida State was in control of this game all the way throughout. LSU given a little bit of life. They get another chance opportunity late with a minute and a half left. They go the length of the field, 99 yards to tie the game up, get 6, miss the extra point. It's blocked. And that's how it ends for Florida State. Even if it was ugly at the end of the day for Florida State, they controlled much of that game up front on both sides of the line of scrimmage. If you're Mike Norvell, this is the game that you had to win. Drew, me and you talked about the recruiting implications for Mike Norvell and the Seminoles. This was a big one, and this is going to be a huge boost for Florida State.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. I mean, Hakeem Williams, the 5-star wide receiver who we seem to talk about on every show, he was in the Caesars Superdome. I looked it up, Cooper. It used to be called Mercedes Superdome. I looked that up on Wikipedia, so don't come at me next time I mispronounce it. No, this was an awesome performance. We said Alex Atkins and that offensive line needed to dominate up front. They got some push. They made things easier for Jordan Travis. And I know LSU was without Mason Smith, who left the game with an injury, but Mike Norvell put his team in position to win this game. It got a little dicey down the stretch, but that's why you play them. That's why you win. And I think this is a signature victory for the Seminoles. Look, I've been super critical of their recruiting efforts ever since they lost Travis Hunter to Jackson State. But now Florida State's in position to use this momentum and pick things up on the recruiting trail. So, kudos, tip of the hat to Mike Norvell for getting the job done, keeping his guys focused. And, he has found playmakers, whether it be through the transfer portal or the conventional high school recruiting. Jared Verse, I mean, how about him? This is a guy that some scout in their department saw when they were trying to, dive into Syracuse, just notice him as an FCS player. No, I loved it for Florida State. Now they get a bye week, and then it's Louisville on the road. So that should be a game. And Louisville just lost to Syracuse. That's a lot more winnable than we thought before. Florida State could be 3-0 before we, snap the fingers and get into October.
The hype train for Florida State, who would have thought week 2 already got it running wild here. But Jared Verse, I mean, let's get the guy in the personnel department raised there if you're Mike Norvell for finding Jared Verse. How is a guy like that walking around at Albany, now at Florida State, wreaking havoc? And man, he kind of ate Will Campbell's lunch, Cam Wire's lunch on the right side of that long line. He was a handful for Florida State. Obviously a huge pickup for them over the offseason. So Florida State, but Drew, let's go to Fayetteville. Turn that damn juice box on. My guy, Sam Pittman, a guy that we love. They get a big win, number 19, Arkansas over number 23, Cincinnati. I think both of those teams were ranked way too low, but the Razorbacks win this game 31 balanced offensive attack. KJ Jefferson looking at complete control of that game, also getting it done on the ground with Rocket Sanders. But Drew, I know you love what Arkansas is doing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Sam Pittman, what did he say? He didn't know if his offensive line was going to bring tea to the picnic or liquor. Well, they brought some liquor. Please, they need to make some shirts for that. I was reading it from our guys at hogsports.com. After the game, Sam Pittman, in his post-game press conference, he was a bit surprised that Arkansas had ran for 224 yards on the ground. He didn't think they had ran for that much. And I think that just speaks to the culture and the mentality of Arkansas. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. You mentioned Raheem Rocket Sanders. I love that running back. He fought for every yard, and I thought he was kind of the difference, the X factor for Arkansas. And to me, Cincinnati's talented. They just didn't seem to have the horses to run with Arkansas, which we saw. We've talked about Jaden Hazelwood, the receiver. You're going to see him catching a touchdown pass right here. I thought he was good. This is a really, really talented Arkansas team. And Cooper, I'll say this: Arkansas in their past 12 games against schools not named Georgia or Alabama, Sam Pittman and the Razorbacks are 10-2. So if you're in the SEC West, watch out. I think this was a bit of a statement for Arkansas. Not surprising to me. I wish I'd maybe played a little bit more on that game, but you got to tip your hat to Sam Pittman after we tipped the hat for Mike Norvell. Impressive performance for him.
I mean, Luke Fickell, I believe, was 22-2 coming into this game against Arkansas in Sam Pittman. To give a little bit of context on that, the only 2 losses he had were to Alabama in the playoff, and then the year before that to Georgia in the postseason. So Luke Fickell doing a heck of a job at Cincinnati. They're a tough team. Ben Bryant getting the start there, a guy that started his career at Cincinnati, went to Eastern Michigan, now back. It looks like the Bearcats are not going to fall off too much. But Drew, now let's get to the bad. We've had the good. We've talked about the teams that have maybe captured positive momentum in week 1 and lived up to the expectations. Now we're going to get to the cons list, and I'm going to start with the Iowa Hawkeyes. Spencer Petras, the quarterback. I mean, what a barn burner here. Iowa, the Hawkeyes beat South Dakota State 7-3. The Hawkeyes 166 yards of total offense against the FCS opponents. 2 second-half safeties. They didn't even score a touchdown in this game. 21 punts, 16 punts, 16 first downs combined in that game. And Iowa was the team that was 121st in total offense last year, 99th in the passing game. They're going to play Iowa State in the Cyclones this week. They got a lot to clean up, Drew.
Yeah, and I was reading some local newspaper articles, and I wish I told producer Jesse to find this one. I think it was on the front page of the local newspaper. They said Iowa victory, and both of the O's were punched out, just left blank, and that was to resemble the lack of offense on Saturday for the Hawkeyes. No, this has kind of been the case. It's a bit alarming, I think, if you're an Iowa fan, that there's more praise for the punter than there is the quarterback. Iowa's got to find an X factor. I don't know if they're going to find it in the 2023 cycle. I know in 2024 they are recruiting a quarterback, Cooper, who I know I'm going to throw out that word, intrigued by a little bit. James Reeser, a kid from Florida that runs at 10-8. But they got to figure something out, modernize that offense, because you can't rely on two safeties to beat an FCS opponent. That doesn't seem like a formula or recipe for success.
Well, Drew, let's talk about the Old Dominion Monarchs against Virginia Tech. And this is kind of something, you go back to 2018, the last time that they played. Old Dominion won that game. Again, they host Virginia Tech here, and they win this game. They win this game 20-17, go-ahead touchdown with 33 seconds remaining. Ricky Ronnie, the head coach of Old Dominion, picking up a big one there. But you look at Old Dominion, 2-12 against Power 5 opponents, but 2-2 versus Virginia Tech. Like I said, last time they defeated the Hokies was in 2018. A tough night for the quarterback, Virginia Tech. Wells, 4 INTs. But Drew, you look at this one, the Brent Pry era to start this off. This is certainly a disappointing loss.
Oh, this just seemed like kind of a perfect storm of disasters. You know, Virginia Tech's coaches were caught in the elevator trying to get up to the press box before the game. After the game, Virginia Tech, some of their players got stuff stolen from their locker rooms. This feels like a coach that's still trying to figure things out, and I don't really point the finger at him. My big question is for the Virginia Tech administration, why are you playing this game? And more importantly, why do we have 8 more of these matchups? I think it's 8 or 9 more of these matchups between Virginia Tech and ODU on the schedule. I think Virginia Tech is in a bit of a rebuild right here, and you should avoid potential hiccups if that's the case. Virginia Tech also travels to Liberty this season. I think next year they're at Marshall, and then they go to ODU again in 2024. No, Brent Pry and his staff have some learning pains and learning curves ahead of them, and if Virginia Tech should have not put him in a position where you're on a group of 5 school on a Friday night. For Old Dominion, that's like their Super Bowl. And once things start snowballing, 4 interceptions from Grant Wells, you mentioned it, kind of turned into that perfect storm for the Hokies, and that's why they're 0-1 after week 1.
If I'm Brent Pry, I know it's probably the opposite way, but I might be calling the AD and say, hey, we need to have a little chat here. What are we doing the next couple of years? Again, Old Dominion week 1, and obviously a tough start for the Hokies. But Drew, I'm in Louisiana. I'm a Louisiana boy. I had to watch the game. I went to LSU. Listen, this game is tough, and that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to start with Brian Kelly, the expectations, a 10-year, $95 million contract. I'm really going to try to keep this as condensed as possible. But last night, the Tigers fell flat and they looked underprepared. And this looked like a Ed Orgeron coach team. A lot of turnovers, special teams gaffes throughout the game. Malik Neighbors, 2 muffed punts, the failed adjustment after an already blocked kick on a 30-yard attempt earlier in the game. LSU, they showed some resolve in the second half. They battled. I thought Jaden Daniels was one of the bright spots, passing for over 200 yards, rushing for another 100. Makeshift offensive line. You got to put it in perspective. LSU had 39 scholarship players last year when Brian Kelly came in. They leaned heavily on the transfer portal. That being said, that type of performance last night was inexcusable. And when Brian Kelly came in, the expectation was that this was going to be a well-coached, very disciplined team. That was not the case last night, but I would caution LSU fans to try to put this in perspective. I went back, I looked at some of the starts of some of the best coaches in the SEC. Kirby Smart, 8 wins in his first year. Nick Saban was a guy who lost to UL Monroe in his first season, UAB when he was at LSU. So put it in perspective. Dan Mullen was one of the guys that had the most success. He's obviously not there anymore. He's doing TV. So Brian Kelly, to me, has his work cut out for him in Baton Rouge. From a personnel standpoint, at the running back position, at the linebacker position, this is a team, when he was at Notre Dame, historically like to go 2 and 3 tight ends, kind of control the presence of the line of scrimmage. They were not able to do that last night. Florida State looked like the more physical team at the point of attack. And if you're LSU, that's got to be a major concern. And listen, you lose this game 24-23. The fact that they were in this game was kind of a head scratcher to me. Mike Norvell kept a minute late with that toss play at the goal line. The biggest news for me, if I'm an LSU fan, is you potentially lose Mason Smith for the season. And without Mason Smith in the middle, that was your biggest impact player. So I think LSU reactive all night on their heels. This is usually a proactive attacking style defense. I didn't feel that. I think there's a ways to go. And this was a reality check from a personnel standpoint for LSU to get back to where they were in 2019, which was one of the best teams that they had and arguably one of the best teams in college football history. But Brian Kelly has his work cut out for him, not only from a personnel standpoint, not only from a coaching standpoint, from a cultural standpoint. Don't even get me started on Kayshon Boutte. So listen, you get paid $95 million for a reason, and this is it. But they're going to need all of that experience that Brian Kelly has gone through at Notre Dame, in South Bend, Cincinnati, Central Michigan, all that before that, if they want to get it right at LSU.
Well, it didn't feel like a cohesive unit to me, and I don't know what you point the fingers at, but we always talk about the transfer portal and roster turnover, but I think sometimes, you take all these outside voices and put different people in different places, you kind of lack an identity, and I got the sense of that. I mean, watching from my couch at home, but in between timeouts, Jaden Daniels, like the backup quarterbacks were talking to him, trying to invoke some confidence in him. It just felt weird. It just felt like a unit that didn't have an identity. And I think that's the biggest thing, Cooper. I don't know if you're going to agree with me, but I think LSU needs to find some type of identity. And we love what they have committed right now in the 2023 recruiting class, but that group's still a few years away. So we'll see. Brian Kelly definitely has his work cut out for him.
I mean, producer Jesse just threw the graphic up of the two Instagram accounts wiped clean of Kayshon Boutte and Malik Neighbors, two receivers last night that really struggled. But this is the era that, and this is my little soapbox here, but Malik Neighbors muffed two punts in this game, gets another opportunity to make a play late. They go back to him on the last drive. Kayshon Boutte is supposed to be one of the best receivers in America. They go back to him, and it takes a play off. Ball hits him square in the chest, not even looking for it. And this is how you react. And to me, there's got to be some level of accountability. If you're Brian Kelly right now, and this is the reaction, right? This is why I talked about the culture. Listen, if your guys aren't all in, you got a 10-year, $95 million contract. You're going to have some time to build this and build this the right way. If your guys aren't committed, then cut bait and go forward. There's too many people out there, too many players, too many athletes, student athletes that are dying to be a part of a program like LSU to have that type of response the moment you go through adversity. So to me, that stuff is childish. And we talk about it, hey, these guys are 17, 18, 19 years old. They are. But listen, Kayshon Boutte is one of the first guys to benefit from that NIL package in Baton Rouge. He was a guy that was supposedly tempted to go transfer to Alabama this offseason. You go through adversity the first time, you wipe your whole social media page. I mean, come on, man. That's where I'm at with that. Obviously, I got a lot of feelings on that, but that's one of those things that's just like, where are we at right now? So social media age, that's where we are, and we'll see what Brian Kelly reacts to this. They got Southern next week, and then Mississippi State comes to town. They were really impressive against Memphis. So LSU, listen, as bad as it was in week one, you had a chance to win that game. They got to get it together, and they got to get it together soon. But enough about the Tigers. We'll talk about them all season. I'm sure they're going to provide many storylines. But Drew, the last guy that you wanted to talk about, Jackson Dart, the USC transfer. We talked about Luke Altmaier. We talked about Jackson Dart, which guys are going to be. Lane Kiffin ends up going with Jackson Dart from USC. 28-10, the Rebs got off to a really good start. The running game was there with Zach Evans, a TCU transfer. Also Quinshon Judkins, a guy from Alabama, the freshman who played really well in this game. But Jackson Dart was a little bit of a mixed bag, Drew, and I know you got some feelings on that.
Yeah, I do. And it seems like everyone wants Jackson Dart to win this quarterback competition. And I know it's a week one sample size. But he struggled, and struggled in the second half. I think Lane Kiffin used the word ugly in his post-game press conference, and I didn't see a ton of it. You see the stat line, you try to go back and watch what you can. To me, if Ole Miss can run the football, I think Luke Altmaier has got to be your guy. I mean, he's a little bit more athletic. from what I've heard, people in Oxford, they've always talked about Luke Altmaier giving Ole Miss and the Rebels the best chance to win. So to me, Altmaier, who's going to get a start next week against Central Arkansas, by the way, kind of getting weird now. When did teams start saying, hey, this guy's going to start week 1, this guy's going to start week 2, we'll figure it out in week 3? I know Michigan's doing that. Now Ole Miss is doing it. That's just all new to me. Interested to see how that pans out. But I'm pounding the table here for Luke Altmaier. If I'm an Ole Miss fan, I think he's a better fit for that offense. I will say, playing devil's advocate, though, I went back and looked. Matt Corral, in his first career start for the Rebels, it was a little bit worse than Jackson Dart. He only threw for 93 yards. I think he was 9 of 18 in a loss to Memphis. And he went on to be a very decorated quarterback there in Oxford. So maybe not time to panic yet. I just want to see what Altmaier looks like against Central Arkansas in week 2, because Ole Miss is going to have to pick one of these guys eventually.
Yeah, what are we going to coin that process? Like Harbaugh called it like a biblical quarterback process. I never thought I'd throw biblical and Lane Kiffin in the same sentence, but here we are. So we'll see how that one plays out. Luke Altmaier, I think, definitely going to get some run. I'd preach patience with Jackson Dart. So we'll keep an eye on Ole Miss. But Drew, we're going to have to go up tempo here. We're already first segment. We're already at 2:30 just about. So we'll get into our second segment. So I'm gonna toss the ball to you here. We talked about this before the show, but you got to see Jackson State up close and personal as they battled Florida A&M this weekend in Miami. And Florida A&M team for a school like Florida A&M was pretty competitive to a point in week 0 against North Carolina, a team that beat App State this past weekend. And Jackson State blasted the Rattlers 59-3. Shadur Sanders, Deion's son, 29 of 33, 323 yards, 5 touchdowns. So we got to see it all. I think you went for the Travis Hunter experience. You came back more impressed with what Deion Sanders is building in Jackson.
Absolutely, Cooper. I'm going to say this, and I know it's a bit of a hot take, but I think Deion Sanders is ready to be a Power 5 head coach. And I have some context behind this take. You know, a couple of years ago, I saw Deion coaching a 7-on-7 team with a few of his sons. That's when he was a high school coach. And then I went and I spent the day at Hard Rock Stadium for the Orange Blossom Classic. Like you said, I went to see Travis Hunter and write about him. I came away just enamored with what Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, has built in such a short amount of time at Jackson State. This felt like a real football program. I mean, during pregame warmups, I was looking around. There wasn't just assistant coaches hanging out, helping those guys get ready. There was analysts. There was an SEC strength coach there who Deion brought in from Georgia. This just feels like a real team. And after the game, during his post-game press conference, Deion was asked about the changes he's made. And he was quick to fire back that, hey, if the college football regulars are doing all this stuff, why aren't we doing it? So I think Deion Sanders has done so much in such a short amount of time for Jackson State, but he's also creating the formula for HBCUs as a whole. I mean, these other programs, Florida A&M, Bethune-Cookman, North Carolina A&T, if they want to see how to succeed at that level, take a page out of the book from Deion Sanders and Jackson State. Sure, we all talk about the players he's got. He's got Travis Hunter, a ton of transfers, but he's building that thing into an actual program. And to me, you know, this is Deion has a CEO type of approach. He wasn't out there trying to call plays or dictate this or dictate that. He let his coaches coach. And I thought that was certainly notable. So I think Deion Sanders, all that talk about him making the jump to the Power 5 ranks, it's warranted. I think this guy is ready for that move. He is 16-5 as a head coach. Jackson State's going to be really, really good this year. So as those rumors start swirling as we get into November and early December, just know that I'm endorsing it. I think Coach Prime is ready for the prime time.
I'm with you, Drew. I don't think he gets enough credit. Like from the 30,000 feet standpoint, this is a guy that it seems to me very in touch with what's needed to be successful at the highest level. You talk about what he's done at Jacksonville State. He's got Mike Zimmer, former Minnesota Vikings head coach, there as a defensive analyst. He's got 4 analysts. I've never seen that at that level. So in terms of the investment that he's got in the program, the eyeballs and the attention that he's brought to Jackson State, it's second to none that we've seen at that level. And listen, if I'm Georgia Tech, if I'm Nebraska, if I'm Louisville, Deion Sanders is one of my first calls. I think he is a dynamic recruiter. You put him in the state of Georgia, you put him in the state of Kentucky, even a place like Nebraska. I think you got to be outside the box a little bit. Deion Sanders is one of those guys. He's got a gravity to him. He's got a presence to him. I think he'll kill it wherever that next opportunity is. And listen, somebody, the fortune favors the bold here, I think is going to make a really, really good decision and not going to regret it with Deion Sanders. But Drew, a lot to talk about. We got college football expansion, man. We are going through. We're talking to the ebbs and flows of week one. We're talking about Deion Sanders. It's going to be like this all season, I feel like, more 45-minute shows. But let's get into the college football playoff expansion starting in 2026. It has now been voted on that the college football playoff format will expand from 4 teams to 12 teams, and a lot going on here. That can change as soon as 2024, that we could go to this format. A lot of what we've seen in terms of the nuts and bolts and how teams will be selected and how they will be ranked. They will still be ranked by the College Football Playoff Committee, but the 4 highest ranked conference champions will receive a first round bye. Teams seeded 5 through 12 will play each other on either the second or third week of December. So, Drew, a lot going on here, but I want to get your takeaways just, on the teams on the outside looking in. This is, I think, the main complaint about the college football playoff era. It's been a lot of the same, a lot of redundancy. We've seen Alabama, Georgia, sometimes 2 representatives from the SEC or one conference, Ohio State, Clemson, a lot of those same teams. Now you open it up to 12, and not for parity's sake, but technically there's going to be more opportunities for teams who have been on the outside of the bubble.
And I think that's what everyone wants, right? I mean, yeah, sure. If you're in Alabama, you're a Georgia fan, some of those other programs, you don't want this. You don't want it to expand, but everyone else does. I mean, if you're a fan of a team that's traditionally kind of a fringe top 25 program, now early on in the season, you're crossing your fingers and holding out hope that you can make the postseason. And look what March Madness has done. I don't think it's going to be the same as that, but we're allowing more teams to be a part of the party. So I love that aspect. Interested to see how the lines get drawn out with conference realignment. I mean, as a group of 5 program, and hashtag I'm a group of 5 guy, I went to Florida Atlantic. We'll see if they ever have a chance at this thing, but this is a move that they want to make. I'm sure it's money and TV deal driven, but I'm here for it. I like it. Let's just see, what the fine print says when it comes time to actually select these teams.
They say it's not money motivated, but I'm not gonna hold my breath on that sentiment. The one thing for me that I will say that I do think is going to be a positive, and Josh Pate is somebody that is not a proponent of college football expansion, and I agree with him, but I do think there are some positives. And to me, you look at the schools that finished 5 through 12 last year: Notre Dame, Ohio State, Baylor, Ole Miss, Oklahoma State, Michigan State, Utah, Pittsburgh. I mean, some of those programs aren't the typical ones that you see at the grown-ups table, and they are on the outside looking in. If I'm a fan of one of those programs, to me, that just applies pressure on a national stage. You're going to see a lot of these cross-conference matchups, and you're going to know what your program needs to do and invest in from a personnel and from a resource standpoint. And you're going to get a barometer year in and year out for what it takes to compete at a national level. That's what I think the positive side of this is. I think the negative side of this is you look at it and you say, hey, what about the relevance week in and week out? Some of these conference games. What about what about LSU and Florida State? Now, if LSU runs the table, that game doesn't hold the same weight. So I think on both sides, there's arguments for it and against it. But Drew, you start to look at this and you're like, hey, this is kind of becoming a little bit more and more like the NFL model. Now we're going to have 12 teams. The NFL is at 14 teams. I know you got a take on that.
I do, but real quick, on the regular season games not mattering, I'm going to push back here with this. Go to a bar on a Sunday. Everyone is watching any NFL game regardless. Watch Thursday night football, Monday night people tune in. You just got to have a product that people want to watch. So that's my counter to the regular season games not mattering. But no, with this expanded playoff, I think we're getting closer and closer to an NFL model when it comes to college football. And we're already seeing it right now. Look, high school recruiting, that's your draft. The transfer portal, that's your free agency. But I wouldn't be surprised if we eventually got two mega conferences, right? Let's take the Big Ten, that can be the NFC, the SEC, that can be the AFC, right? And then you kind of have an NFL style playoffs with a wild card division, with some first round buys, and maybe it's only 48 teams, 24 and 24 in each one of those conferences, but I think that's not that far away. And if that were to happen, then let everyone else, the other 60 schools or 60, 65 schools, let them have their own playoff. Make that a different type of division. And maybe it's a feeder system where guys go up and they come back down. But I do think, to me, that's was my initial thought when news broke on Friday that this thing expanded. Hey, we're getting a lot closer to a true NFL model with college football, and we'll see what happens. We keep talking about NIL and all this stuff and all these deals. What happens if there's a collective bargaining agreement at some point down the line? So I think that's something to keep an eye on with the expanded playoff.
Future of college football seemingly is here and drawing closer and closer. You talk about super conferences, college football playoff expanding to 12. That could come as early as 2024. So a lot changing. We'll keep you up to date on all that. And as we get to our 2-minute drill, just a reminder, if you haven't subscribed to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel yet, make sure you do that. Our director of recruiting, Steve Wilfong, doing an excellent job on the Wilfong Whip Around. Keep you up to date with all your scoop. I know you get your juice here. You get the scoop from Wilfong, the block as well, Blake Brockermeyer and Carl Reed. So make sure you subscribe, like, leave a comment, all that type of stuff helps us, please, in the algorithm. But Drew, now let's turn to the 2-minute drill. A little bit of hurry up offense. The last couple of minutes been more of the 4-minute drill, but I want to start with a team out west in the Pac-12 conference and a team that I am very familiar with. And for me, a team that I enjoy watching on Saturday, and especially with what they went through the last couple of seasons, the Jimmy Lake experience up in Montlake in Seattle. But Kalen DeBoer, breath of fresh air. The Washington Huskies, everything was difficult last year. This time last year, they're losing to Montana. It was a rough start to the season. They get the win over Kent State, 45-20. And you might be saying, well, that's what they're supposed to do. But like I said, nothing came easy. So to see this offense in 10, 11 personnel, use the strength of their team, Jalen McMillan, Roma Dunze, Taj Davis combined for 15 receptions in a win. I thought Michael Penix Jr., Drew, from your neck of the woods in Florida, the Indiana transfer, is the perfect fit in Kalen DeBoer's offense. A guy that looked really comfortable on Saturday. He finished the night 26-39, 345 yards and 4 touchdowns. So if you're looking at a footprint, you're looking at a team that can maybe surprise some people this year. They have some pieces on defense as well. Asa Turner, a guy coming back, a veteran on the back end of that defense, had 2 INTs. So if you're a Huskies fan, just as low as it's been maybe the last year or so, this was a breath of fresh air and a lot to like there. But Drew, we were told, hey, there's kind of this all of a sudden to the forefront now. Special teams, we understand. I think everybody, as of last night, understands why they call it special teams. And last night, for some teams, it wasn't so special. So, Drew, I know you got some thoughts on special teams, personnel process. Hey, do we need 3 scholarship players, or can we go and get a walk-on or a guy that we favor and maybe groom them there?
Well, first off, I'm just glad you realize where Michael Penix is from. I was going to ask you where he's from. He's from the Sunshine State, Tampa Bay Tech. But no, let's talk about special teams. I think all of America watched LSU last night in that disaster. You talked about the muff punts, the missed extra points, the missed field goals. I think LSU fans are certainly missing Cade York. And if you go back and read some of the most recent articles about LSU in training camp, in fall camp, Brian Kelly and Brian Polian, the special teams coordinator, they addressed that there were some concerns on special teams. The kicker last night, he was a walk-on. I think this is just a clear-cut case that has been made that you need 2 scholarship specialists. And I'm not talking about having an opening, a walk-on tryout where you invite a few kids or go down to the fraternity house like Lane Kiffin did and grab a punter at the last minute. No, you need to get specialists, and that can be the difference with the slightest margin in these games. So go and use a scholarship. Go and find another Cade York, who is a 4th-round draft pick, and will start for the Cleveland Browns. I think so many times people overlook punting. I talked about it with Iowa. That was the star of the Hawkeyes' 7-3 win over an FCS opponent. But kicking, long snapping. And then, hey, maybe we should start scholarshiping punt returners, guys that can catch the ball under pressure, in the lights, in the moment. Something to think about moving forward.
Man, that last one, a little bit unnecessary there, but I get it, no, for sure. But listen, I would say at Washington, and this was something I always thought about, you only have 85 scholarships. Chris Peterson and I went back and forth on this in terms of how we're going to utilize these scholarships. Every one of these scholarships is valuable when you're building a championship team. And I just remember you wanted you wanted to scholarship a long snapper, and the following year, before we knew he was going to retire, we were going to play Michigan at home in Seattle. And he said, that's what keeps me up at night, is that we don't have a long snapper right now. So we ended up putting a long snapper on scholarship, taking him into that class. And as a coach or as a personnel guy, you don't really understand the anxiety that comes with special teams if you were the head coach. And obviously you see all of the worst nightmares come to fruition last night for Brian Kelly and the Poley and who oversees the special teams. So listen, if it were me, I think it'd be 3 scholarship guys. You got to have your long snapper, you got to have your place kicker, and then you got to have your punter plus your kickoff specialist as well. And then what I would do is go find 3 walk-ons that can compete with those guys. I think competition at those positions is absolutely imperative. So special teams playing a huge role in week 1 wins and losses. And last night, LSU learned the hard way on that. So we'll certainly keep an eye on that one. But I'm going to remind you one last time, subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, like, subscribe, comment. Drew, that's all I got for today. You got anything else?
Oh, I was going to say, last night, you think LSU was more concerned about having a 9th scholarship receiver or a scholarship punter or kicker, excuse me?
I'm going to take that as a rhetorical question, but great show, guys. We appreciate you as always coming in. And like I said, please leave a comment. Tell us what you like about the show or what needs to improve. We're all about that constructive criticism. But for Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. We will be back on Wednesday to talk a little bit more college football and recruiting at 3 p.m. Eastern time, 2 p.m. Central. We'll see you then.